The average backyard gardener spends hundreds of dollars on raised beds, tills the soil until it's lifeless dust, and still produces mediocre harvests from plots that take up half the yard. But there's a cultivation method that doubles your yield while using half the space and actually improves soil quality year after year without any tilling. The problem isn't that you don't have enough land, it's that the typical rows system wastes 90% of your soil's productive potential by spreading roots thin instead of growing them deep. Here's how to double your harvest in half the space using the deep bed method that John Seymour perfected over decades of intensive food production. The fundamental reality that modern gardening has forgotten is that plants don't need width, they need depth. And when you concentrate your efforts on creating deep, fertile soil in narrow beds instead of shallow, depleted soil across wide rows, you unlock exponential productivity that seems impossible until you see it with your own eyes. Every gardener who walks past rows of vegetables spaced 3 feet apart with hard-packed walkways between them is watching their potential harvest literally going to waste, because those walkways represent soil that could be feeding roots but instead just gets compacted by footsteps. Here's the real secret. Seymour's deep bed system isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter, by understanding that vertical root growth produces more food than horizontal sprawl. And once you build these beds correctly, you'll never go back to conventional rows because the difference in yield is so dramatic it feels like cheating. The deep bed method works because it creates soil conditions that are the opposite of what nature provides in most locations, which means instead of shallow topsoil over compacted subsoil, you're building 2 feet of loose, fertile growing medium that roots can penetrate effortlessly. Picture a raised bed, 4 feet wide and any length you want, filled with dark, crumbly, compost-rich soil so loose you can push your entire arm into it without resistance, where earthworms move freely and roots grow straight down instead of spreading sideways searching for nutrients. Now this is the game changer. When roots grow deep instead of wide, you can plant vegetables much closer together than conventional spacing allows. And instead of competition, you get cooperation, where the dense canopy of leaves shades the soil, retains moisture, and suppresses weeds, while roots occupy different depths and don't interfere with each other. Traditional flat gardening might have tomato plants spaced 3 feet apart in rows 4 feet apart, which means each plant occupies 12 square feet. But in a deep bed, you can grow tomatoes 18 inches apart because the roots go down 2 feet instead of spreading sideways, which means you fit 4 times as many plants in the same area and get 4 times the harvest.
Building a deep bed starts with marking out beds that are 4 feet wide, which is the critical dimension because it allows you to reach the center from either side without stepping on the growing area. And length doesn't matter, so make them as long as your space allows. The 4-foot width isn't arbitrary. It's based on human reach and ensures you never compact the soil by walking on it, which is one of the fundamental principles that makes this system work. This is where most gardeners fail. Next, you double dig the bed, which is the most labor-intensive part, but only needs to be done once, and it involves removing the top 12 inches of soil from the first section, setting it aside, then loosening the subsoil below with a fork to another 12 inches depth. Move to the next section, remove the topsoil and place it in the first section on top of the loosened subsoil, then loosen the subsoil in the second section and continue this pattern until the entire bed is double dug with loose soil 2 feet deep. It's hard work, yes, but you do it once and the bed produces for decades. This double digging breaks up compacted layers that prevent root penetration and creates the deep, loose structure that makes everything else possible. And while it requires real effort initially, you're building permanent infrastructure that will feed your family for years. As you dig, incorporate massive amounts of compost and well-rotted manure into both the topsoil and subsoil layers, aiming for at least a third of the final volume to be organic matter because this feeds the soil life that will maintain the structure and fertility long-term. John Seymour believed that soil is the bank where all future harvests are stored, and double digging is how you make that first deposit that pays dividends forever. Once the bed is built, the cardinal rule is never step on it, because a single footstep compacts soil and undoes the work you've done creating that loose, aerated structure. Use boards laid across the bed if you need to reach the center for planting or harvesting, and always work from the paths on either side.
And here's the part nobody tells you. The planting strategy is where deep beds reveal their power. Because instead of rows with wide spacing, you plant in offset patterns that maximize density while ensuring each plant has enough space. Lettuce that would be spaced 12 inches apart in rows can be planted 8 inches apart in all directions in a deep bed, creating a living carpet of leaves with no bare soil visible.
Root vegetables like carrots and beets can be broadcast seeded and thinned to just 2 inches apart because the roots grow straight down instead of competing sideways. Large plants like tomatoes, peppers, and brassicas use closer spacing than traditional gardens but still need room for their canopy, so plant them in triangular or hexagonal patterns that fit more plants per square foot while maintaining airflow. The key is understanding that you're not just cramming plants together, you're creating a system where dense planting becomes possible because the deep, fertile soil provides enough resources for roots growing vertically instead of horizontally. Succession planting becomes incredibly efficient in deep beds because you can interplant fast-growing crops between slow-growing ones, harvesting the quick crops before the slow ones need the space. Plant lettuce between tomato seedlings in spring, and by the time the tomatoes are large enough to shade the ground, the lettuce is harvested and gone. Sow radishes between carrot seeds, and the radishes will be pulled before the carrots need the room to mature. The soil in deep beds stays loose and friable year after year without tilling because you never compact it by walking on it, and because the constant addition of compost and organic mulch feeds earthworms and soil organisms that do the tilling for you underground. Each season, simply pull out finished plants, add a layer of compost, and plant the next crop directly into the existing soil structure. Here's what the numbers actually look like. A single 4 by 20 foot deep bed can produce 100 to 120 pounds of tomatoes per season or 40 pounds of carrots without chemical fertilizer, which is what would take 300 square feet of conventional garden to match. Water efficiency improves dramatically because the deep soil acts like a reservoir that holds moisture and releases it slowly to roots, and because the dense plant canopy shades the soil surface and prevents evaporation. A deep bed might need watering once a week, where traditional flat gardening needs it every other day. And in many climates, the beds become almost self-watering through the growing season. The typical row system might require hours of weeding every week, while a deep bed needs minutes because the system itself suppresses weeds through competition and shading. The yield difference is so dramatic, it changes your entire relationship with gardening, because suddenly a small backyard plot produces more food than you can eat, and you're giving away vegetables to neighbors. A 4 by 20 foot deep bed, which is 80 square feet, produces what would take 300 square feet to match using conventional methods. And it does it with less water, less weeding, and less work overall once the initial construction is complete. Here's what this means in practice. Instead of needing a quarter acre to feed your family, you need a few deep beds totaling maybe 500 square feet, which fits in most suburban backyards with room left over for a patio and lawn. Instead of spending every evening weeding and watering, you spend 20 minutes a week maintaining beds that practically take care of themselves. Instead of mediocre yields that barely justify the effort, you're harvesting bushels of vegetables from a space smaller than most people's flower gardens. You're not fighting against nature or trying to force plants to grow in suboptimal conditions. You're creating ideal conditions where plants thrive because everything they need is available in abundance, and the system maintains itself through biological processes that work better the longer the beds are established. The deep bed method isn't about going backward to old-fashioned techniques. It's about understanding that the industrial agriculture model of wide spacing and mechanical tillage never made sense for home gardens, where space is limited and quality matters more than quantity. Once you build your first deep bed and watch it outproduce your conventional garden by a factor of 3 or 4, you'll understand why Seymour called this the most efficient food production system ever developed for small-scale growing. So start today by marking out one 4-foot wide bed, double dig it properly with massive amounts of compost, and plant it densely using the spacing guidelines that seem impossibly tight until you see the results. Watch that bed produce more food than an area 3 times its size planted conventionally, then build another bed and another until your entire garden is converted to this system that doubles your harvest while cutting your work in half. Space isn't the limitation, it's the opportunity. The moment you start growing down instead of out, your garden becomes twice as productive in half the space. And that's not marketing, that's mathematics.